Nor the honor of its nations and governments, nor the honor of its principles and intended goals, the League of Nations was established to create a new world order, Wilson desired, in order to govern international relations according to international law rather than under the sort of greedy impulses of colonial empire, right? So Ritter continues, it does not befit this league then to be used as a tool by two colonial states. These states seek to use this assembly, he's speaking to the head of the League Assembly here, to guarantee in the name of the mandate the subjugation of peoples. And he warned, if the Balkans were a spark of war in the West, he's referring to 1914 and the start of World War I, then Syria, Palestine, and other Arab countries will ignite the fires of war in both the West and the East if the mandate for Syria were not stripped from the French. And so I conclude the book in a place where I hope to start with my next research project, you know, with the observation that the absolute bitterness that Arabs felt having been excluded from civilized nations, having once been citizens of an independent country, the Ottoman Empire, and now cast along with colonial peoples, meaning cast on the wrong side of the color line. They had entered World War I as white people who bear rights and exited the Paris Peace Conference as peoples of color who did not deserve basic rights. It is, I think, that atmosphere that we must look to understand the rise of anti-Western Islamism in the 1920s and to understand the roots of the kind of Islamic movements that we face today. Thanks.
The clip you just heard was from Elizabeth Thompson's interview at Prose and Politics. And the reason I'm actually using this particular clip, because for the most part, nobody cares about why Arabs lost democracy after World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. But what she said in the middle of that clip, towards the end of the clip, about the color line and the Arabs being on the wrong side of the color line in relation to white people, going from having privilege and freedom to being subjugated, which, if you think about it, what she said was something W. Du Bois said in 1890 about the 20th century is going to be about the color line. And it's funny how the color line shows up all over the world. But the reason I'm using the clip is because we have a certain segment of people here on Black YouTube and the Black manosphere in particular talking about that racism doesn't exist, or they don't believe racism exists. They don't believe in white supremacy. And when people ask me about it, I kind of brushed it off and I said, talking about it, describing and admitting the existence of racism and white supremacy is like talking about water being wet and it covering 2/3 of the planet's surface. It's kind of like obvious. And I know there are certain segments in Black YouTube and the Black manosphere that espouse this. They don't believe in it. They don't accept its existence, but it, just like water, it doesn't matter whether you accept its existence or not. Just like gravity, it doesn't matter whether you accept its existence or not. At the end of the day, you're gonna feel its effects. Like if I don't believe in gravity, but I jump off a 300-foot cliff, gravity is gonna have its way with me. Gravity is gonna show its power and effect over me. And the laws of what we call racism and white supremacy extend far beyond the boundaries of Black YouTube or the Black manosphere or even America, period. Racism, white supremacy in particular for the last 200 years goes all over the globe. And its symbol for a whole lot of years has been that aircraft carrier parked some 100 miles off the coast of you pick a country. So when I engage with these people, they don't even bring it up because they know better. They know better than to challenge me about racism, white supremacy. They'll know better than to bring it up. Because as as YouTube, people on YouTube, Obsidian used to do, when I give an example and I expand it beyond the normal boundaries of what black people encounter, they always try to pull it back in. I'm talking about black people. So they try to limit the argument to the point where they can understand it, or where they can actually influence where their argument is. And the whole argument is in the macro, not the micro. Do black people experience, black men in particular, experience the power and the direct effects of white supremacy? Yes, they do. When Goldman Sachs gives money to your women and not to you, that's white supremacy, boss. When you still got 600,000 black males incarcerated in this country, and you got 100,000 white people killing each other for illicit drugs, and you don't arrest them, or you don't try to stem that flow by a direct crackdown of police, that's white supremacy. When black men go to jail over using marijuana, and white men damn near kill themselves on illegal narcotics, and they get Narcan, and they get intervention, okay, and they get drug counseling, that's white supremacy. That's the local level. On a macro level, ask Chinese, do they believe that white supremacy still exists? Ask the Afghanis, where white people just left, does white supremacy still exist? Ask Mexico, does white supremacy still exist? Ask the countries that are still struggling under French colonial influence and the CFA, does white supremacy still exist? I was just reading where Zimbabwe is campaigning to get back into the British Commonwealth. Ask them, do they believe white supremacy still exists? They'll all tell you yes. Ask Venezuela, who's suffering under the economic sanctions coming from the United States and the West. Do they believe white supremacy still exists? It's a silly notion for black people living in the belly of the beast that have a direct effect. White supremacy shows a direct effect upon you, to say that it doesn't exist. For black males, black men that are grown and grew up and live in this country, to say that it doesn't exist, I put them in the same league, in the same category as flat earthers. Just because you don't want to believe in it, just because you want to change your status in life, your standing in this country, espousing it and believing in it doesn't change it. All it takes is one stroke of a pen to put you back where you were. Even white feminists believe in white supremacy. They might talk out of their mouths about whether they support it one way or the other, but they believe in it, they use it. Hell, your woman uses it against you when she wants to castigate you and take rights, privileges, and resources from you. And the reason I use this particular clip, where you can see a white lady out of her own mouth talk about the color line and how it affects a group that was like 10,000 miles away from America, from the American South, at the same time that they were bombing Black Wall Street in Tulsa. They were buckling under the same effects, and still are. You look at places like Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen. What went on in the 1920s is still with us. What went on in slavery amongst black people is still with us. Those effects are still with us. Just because you wish them away, just because time passes, doesn't mean that the effects go away. I was talking recently about Crimea and Russia and the Ukraine. How many wars did Russia fight over Crimea with the West? Go back to the Crimean War in 1856. And it pops back up in 2015. The same area for the same reason. Very famous quote. The past is never dead and buried. In fact, it's never even past. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. These kind of patterns take a long time to change. And just because you think that the event or the series of events were a long time ago, that they still don't have an effect, they still do. Because they push humanity and history off into a particular trajectory. It's like a crack of a bat and a ball sailing over the fence in a Major League Baseball game, right? The initial event was the pitcher throwing the ball and where he threw it. And the reaction of the crack of the bat was the batter swinging. Now that ball is still under the influence of where the bat was hit, but after a while, its trajectory is influenced, but it's not dependent on the bat anymore. Same thing with history. The conquistadors discovered silver in what we call Mexico now, and their greed for silver and power still affects us today, some 500 years later. This whole enterprise that was built started with some conquistadors discovering silver. Hundreds of millions of lives later, it still affects us. White supremacy, or race as we want to call it, is a 200-year-old idea. Relatively short when you think about the written history of the world that started in Egypt or China, wherever, you pick your spot. Those things, those events still affect us. White supremacy still affects us. Just because you wish it away or you wish you had a different place in it doesn't matter. It's like gravity. You've adapted, it holds you to the surface of the earth and keeps you from floating off into space. It's benign. It's necessary until you violate its laws. Same thing with white supremacy. It's fairly benign as long as you don't violate any of its tenets. Its effect on you now, today, is rather light as comparison to what it was 50 years ago, or even more over 150 years ago. That white supremacy's touch is light, but you don't get it twisted, it still affects you. When they gentrify your neighborhoods, that's white supremacy. When they push white people and black people together and force the Karens to come out and accuse you and call police on you. You notice when the Karens come out and you're a black person walking down the street minding your own business, that the cops just happen to roll up on you and they take her word over yours? Yeah, not quite an aircraft carrier or a military expedition or even a banking sanction, but its effect is just the same. So next time, in my opinion, you deniers, you flat earthers, remember this lesson. It's bigger than you, boo. So grow up. Anyway, that's all I got for this one. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.